All right, answers for Quora. What is the Torah's stance on Zionism and modern Israel?
There we go.
This is probably the most controversial question in not only the Jewish world in general, but in the Orthodox Jewish world today. Basically, there are three views. Probably the most traditional view is the anti-Zionist view, which is that Zionism is heretical. We're supposed to wait for the Messiah, and so the modern state of Israel is antithetical to our faith. However, in today's day and age, that is a minority view in the Jewish world and even in the Orthodox Jewish world, even though it is a large minority. The second view is sort of an ambivalent view. We can wait and see, but we really don't know what this is. But nonetheless, we are concerned with certain status quo issues and safety issues. And the third view, which is the most modern or new view, not really a traditional view, is that using political means to build the state is some kind of realization of eschatology. And you have some rabbis who believe this as well, even great scholars among them. But for the most part, maybe the larger laity might be in that camp, although it's not as much today as it was because the ultra-Orthodox community has grown exponentially. In general, it will be the modern Orthodox Jewish world that will be what would be called religious Zionist. It's not exactly the same. There are some differences, and there are some more strict religious Zionists who would not call themselves modern Orthodox, or they would call themselves right-wing modern Orthodox, things like that. And then from the ultra-Orthodox world, for the most part, rejects Zionism, and they're either from the non-Zionist camp or the anti-Zionist camp. There are some overlaps of all of these, and in general, even though we disagree, all of these different camps recognize one another as being authentic Orthodox Jews. And so with that being said, it's hard to say what the Torah's stance is because it seems that all three of these are valid within the Torah viewpoint. Now, if you want to use the minimalistic term for Torah of just being the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, there's one story that both the pro-Zionist side and the anti-Zionist side like to point to. No irony is lost that both are looking at the same story. There's a story in the book of Numbers of 12 spies that were sent to spy out the Holy Land, 10 of whom brought back a negative report about the Holy Land, and that was the reason why God made the decree that the Israelites should wander in the desert for 40 years. It wasn't because Moses didn't want to ask for directions. It happens to be Purim today. It was because, like we said, that because of this sin of the spies, that they rejected the Holy Land, and they didn't have faith that God would bring them into the Holy Land, that the decree was made that that generation would die in the desert and they would wander for 40 years, even though 19 of those years were all in one place. They didn't wander that much. They would camp, and they would stay for a few years in one encampment and go somewhere else, and so forth. And the pro-Zionist side will often bring this story to show that the anti-Zionist side is wrong. There's a problem with that, is that you have to read the end of the story. after the decree was made, there was a group, they were called Mapilim, who tried to enter the Holy Land, and Moses told them it will not succeed, and they all got killed. And so that's the end of the story supports the anti-Zionist approach, because the point is the anti-Zionist Orthodox will agree that eventually the Messiah will come and will build a temple and they'll be ingathering the exiles. The question is, when? Can we do it ourselves, or do we have to wait till God's decree? And from that story, from the second part of the story, that would seem to bolster up the idea that God decides when we go to the Holy Land, not our own guns and armies and so forth. And the fact that there's been so much bloodshed since the Zionist movement began in the 1890s, in 1929 in Hebron, after the Zionist movement began, and then the fact that there was, we can leave out the part about what happened during the Holocaust. Obviously both sides disagree, on what that means. But there's both sides of that story too, as to whether or not Zionism could have stopped the Holocaust or Zionism caused the Holocaust. Both views are present. Maybe the first view gets more public relations, but the second view is also a very valid view. And then, of course, since the state began, all the wars and terrorism and so forth could be attributed from the anti-Zionist point of view to this fact of Zionism, of being that we rejected God's decree. The Zionists rejected God's decree of exile instead of waiting for God to decide when the Jewish people would regain sovereignty in the Holy Land. That being said, also, in the Holy Land, there are anti-Zionist communities that were in the Holy Land before the state began, and they like to say they'll still be there after the state is gone. Again, I'm not necessarily taking sides, one or the other. But again, there's enough ambiguity for both sides. It's not for me as a small town rabbi to take and not a great scholar or authority of any kind, just a regular chaplain, rabbi. It's not for me to make any of these pronouncements of which side is right and which side is wrong. What I like to believe is that there's some truth in both sides, but we have to find the right balance. And also, there's a benefit for the Jewish people to not be united on this subject, because we see from the Torah that Jacob divided his children into different camps. This way, if one camp is attacked, the other camp will escape. And so too with this question. It's not only physically to not put all your eggs in one basket, but ideologically as well. There's a benefit in ideological diversity, and that's always been the case in the Jewish world. Now, there's a limit. When the doctrine is rejected, when the basic doctrines and dogmas of Judaism are rejected, so then they're not in that camp at all. They're outside the camp. When the basic practices are rejected, someone doesn't keep the Sabbath or kosher and so forth in any form, even in the more liberal forms, then again, such a person's outside the camp. But those of you who are inside the camp, meaning people who keep the Sabbath, they keep kosher, they keep the mikveh laws, they keep the holidays, they pray 3 times a day. All right, so this one wears a black hat, this one wears a shtreimel, this one wears a baseball cap, This one has a knitted yarmulke. This one wears a black suit. This one doesn't wear a suit, doesn't wear a tie. This one wears a long robe. All these different. This one is from Europe. This one's from the Middle East. This one's from Africa. All the different customs that developed. There's a saying in the Talmud, Eilu ve'eilu divrei Elokim chayim. Both this and this are the words of the living God, even though that really only applies to Talmudic dictum, but in a colloquial sense we can apply it as well to these questions and to see, you know what, there are many different views, and as long as you're somewhere in the Venn diagram of that which is kosher, you're part of you're within the camp. And if you might be on the edge of the camp, we can try to welcome you in if you want to come in. And if you want to join, you can join, but it's on our terms. But the thing is, like I said, as far as joining, all three of these camps will agree that this question is not the most central issue that there is. Keeping the Sabbath, keeping kosher, believing in one God, believing the Torah is divine, rejecting false messiahs, things like this. These are the things that are more central for us all to agree on. And these other questions, we should be able to agree to disagree and love one another and have respect that there are different views within, and I know in some ways that offends everybody. That was the way of the Kloisenberger Rebbe. He offended everybody because he loved everybody. And sometimes you have to do that. But that's my approach that I can share here on a public forum like this to make this point. I remember I got accused of being a virulent anti-Zionist because I wanted to say that both views are kosher. And people from the Zionist side didn't have tolerance for that. And sometimes people from the anti-Zionist side also don't have tolerance. We have to find a middle road. We have to find a way to love each other, to respect each other, to agree to disagree. I might share one view or another view, but we have to find a way to respectfully agree to disagree. That's really what it comes down to. So have a Freilichen Purim. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you later. How do I turn this thing off? This one? This one? There. Did it turn off? It didn't turn off.